So how y'all doing? Anybody got any big earth-shattering news they've heard about their welding training for the fall they want to share? Looking to see.
Yeah, I'll share, Gerald.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Gerald. I'm at Gateway Technical College, which is in Wisconsin. And, we started our summer session. We go 3 semesters. So we restarted this week, actually yesterday. Got some new rules. We got no more than 12 students in the lab, social distancing in between. Let's see what else. Everybody has to wear a mask all the time on campus. Students are required to wipe down their equipment when they're done at the end of the day. No group demonstrations. No going into booths with students. Yeah. It is what it is, but we've restarted. And in the fall, who knows? I think we'll revisit where we're at in the fall. But numbers are way down population-wise.
Yeah, that's going to be hard not being able to go into a booth unless you've got, some fairly advanced students that you can,
Yeah, it goes back to being an internet welder. Somebody brings you a coupon and then here, oh, your arc length was too long. Not really doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, we're not really needed if that's the case.
No.
And anybody else got started back up and have something going on? Maybe they want to share about, hey, this is a pain, or this has made it real easy. All right. Well, if you got any questions, put them in the chat and I'll try to look at them. And I'll go ahead and get started with this presentation. We got about 18 people here. I'm wondering if some folks didn't maybe go to the last link. This is a new Zoom meeting link, so it's different than the other one. But if you have questions, put them in the chat, and that way I'll see it flash. And we'll go from there, and we can stop during the presentation. It's about 35 slides. I didn't put as much in there about AWS-B 2.1 as I wanted to, but if we got some questions when we get done, we can definitely talk about them. I'll try to go through them fairly quick. I can give you a copy of the PowerPoint if you want it, the PDF or the actual PowerPoint file if you want to do something with it and modify it. And then, of course, we'll have a video when all this is over. I hope y'all are having a good day. I appreciate y'all coming to hang out with me for a little bit for sure. We'll go ahead and get started. You should be seeing the screen. So purpose of the presentation, I'm trying not to read every slide, but again, it's kind of what was in my brain when I made it up. So it's an introduction to various aspects about the welder qualification. Okay, not going to cover everything. This is going to kind of give you an idea. If you're interested in taking a course, I haven't worked out all the details about whether I'm going to charge fees or how much I'm going to charge, but it will be a weekly meeting similar to this at a different time and online in a Moodle class where I'll have actual exercises, quiz questions, and some presentations that you'll look at just there. The way that it'll be laid out is we'll do a meeting to kind of kick it off. You'll do assignments online, work through problems there, and then we'll meet once we talk about those. Okay? It won't be as much as me sitting here and lecture as much as it will be, hey, I watched your video that you made about prepping guided bend tests and you're crazy. Talk about why I'm crazy. So we'll go ahead and get on to the next one here. What we're going to cover is when is welder testing required? Who can perform it? Testing and certification. Is welder testing, it's all that's required. I kind of put in here, mute your mic if you're going to burp on me now. Is welder testing all that's required? This kind of was set up also for manufacturers and contractors, so we're going to hit on that a little bit. What's a certified welder? And some further training options, which really I kind of just talked about, but also going to have some links where some additional information is at. And then questions and answers. But again, I've got the screen up here where I can see it. If you've got a question, you can raise your hand, but I'll also look for the flashing chat box. So when is welder testing required? When it's required by laws, jurisdictional laws in your region, maybe for a product, don't really know, but that's when it's required. When it's required by companies, it's another option. Companies requires welders to take tests sometimes they don't. That's one of the options we're going to cover. And then when, of course, is required by schools, which may be something of more interest to us. There may be situations where we have to meet some requirements for testing so many of our students. So the when required by laws, most of these are what I call by reference. There are very few laws on the books where it just says your welders have to be tested and certified. Typically, there's going to be a law out there that is part of some other larger group of laws. For instance, the building codes. Most of the states in the United States and in other countries refer to the International Building Code of 2012 or 2015, whichever one it may be, IBC. It's also called ICC, International Construction Code, I think, or International Code Council. But those specific documents refer to a document from the American Institute of Steel Construction, AISC 360. AISC 360 in turn refers to AWSD 1.1, and we know that AWSD 1.1 requires welders to be qualified. Okay, they have to be tested and have to meet all those requirements. So there's not a specific law about, oh, you've got to have your welder certified, but by reference, it trickles down to it. Or structural steel field. Someone's got their mic on and has some background noise. Maybe it's me.
I think it's Jason.
Maybe. So that's one case is with the building codes. Bridges and transportation. Okay, the Department of Transportation groups in each individual state and the U.S. Department of Transportation all have rules for road signs, for bridges, for pedestrian walkways, all that type of stuff. And for the most part, those end up referring to another pre-existing industry code or standard D1.1 or D1.5 that I have listed there. And there may be some other cases. But I know that in Virginia, for instance, they've got I think it's about 1,100 pages is their requirements for bridges and appurtenances. Within it, it doesn't necessarily have any really detailed restrictions that add to what D1.1 or D1.5 say about doing that welding. So another case, yeah, you got to have qualified welders for bridges and transportation type items, but it's already in writing somewhere in a code. Now, other jurisdictions may be different. There may be, I believe it's in New York State. Don't know if anybody's up there or not, but I just know it from calls that I've got to test welders. They required their welders on bridges to be AWS certified welders. So they added to what D1.5 said. They had to be registered as AWS certified. Transmission pipelines, everybody wants to be a pipeline.
Hold on.
Hello? I hear voices.
Maybe those are in your head, Gerald.
There's a possibility. Transmission pipelines. Okay, the transmission pipelines, gas and other product are part of the combined federal regulations. So the 49 CFR subpart E addresses that. And in some cases, it just plainly refers to API 1104 and or ASME Section 9. But now for some types of pipelines that are subjected to less than, I think 20% of the specified minimum yield strength, you don't have to use API 1104 or ASME Section 9. They've got actual requirements within the 49 CFR, I think Appendix C, that tells you, here's all your requirements for your test. It doesn't refer to any outside code. And then, of course, boilers and pressure vessels. Tennessee boiler law, it refers right to all of the ASME codes and the National Board Inspection Code. There's nothing added to it. There's no outside inspector has to witness your test when you do a welder qualification test, that kind of stuff. So those are examples of when it's required by laws. Anybody got any questions about that or something to add to it or straighten me out on?
Real quick,
there, Gerald. Would boiler in Tennessee, do they go under the ASME B31?
Well, for the boiler external piping, yes, B31.1. So they referred, so all of that, the B31 code, the B31.1 code applies to everything up to that first valve as far as being a state law part of it. Then the other piping that falls out of that may still be B31.1, but you don't have to have a PP stamp for it.
Gotcha.
Anybody, and these are if you get this PowerPoint, these links should work. So, it'll go to the International Building Code. And I've got it linked to the portion for steel. So that might be, like I said, that may be something to look at. PowerPoint stopped working. It got mad. I got the blue swirly. There's my desktop all cleaned up. Sorry about that. I reckon my PowerPoint did not like that link. Anybody got any other questions though about what we covered in the laws, or maybe some additional information to add?
There are other areas. Aviation has its standards. Marine has its standards.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely just covered a few of them, and I think there are, there's quite a few of them for products, for instance, that may may fall into place there. So anyway, that's the ones required by laws, and again, it's by no means all inclusive. But if somebody has, if somebody had experience with with one of them, love to hear what your story is. If it's something where the law went way above a code, those are things I'm always interested in learning a little bit about. Like I said, I'm familiar with the one in New York, and I've heard other things like with many of the DOTs, they oftentimes want a DOT inspector to actually witness the performance qualification tests.
In the state of Kentucky, I go to a lot of schools there, and most of them have a certification based on the DOT certifications.
Okay. All right, so when it's required by companies, candidate pre-screening, hey, can you weld? Employee advancement. I've actually done tests where I worked for a steel fabricator many years ago that all they did was flux core, and I may have mentioned this before, but for them to advance to the next level for the next pay raise bracket, they had to be able to pass a 3G, 4G test with 7018. So good thing about it is I got to do lots of training. Bad thing about it is I got scolded severely for telling the ones that passed when I got the RT results back, because I guess that's that was not necessarily how the advancement system was supposed to work. That was just part of it. But I'd already told them, I said, as soon as I got their x-ray results back, I said, you passed, you passed, you passed. So that was private information I wasn't supposed to necessarily share, but it was too late. It happened. Internal company requirements for their product may require welder testing of some type. So not every product that's built, every widget has a code for it. So a company may write up their own internal specification. They may come up with their own ideas for how they're going to do the testing, or they may refer to another document. But it can be wholly based on that company. Comply with the requirements of an owner of a facility. That's mainly in construction. If you come in and work at my plant, you've got to have your welder certified. Well, typically that's going to be because it's required by another code. But I have seen a few situations though where the company owner wanted to, or an owner's rep wanted to witness the testing. Now in the pipeline industry, I believe that's the norm. But in field construction, it's not necessarily required. But I've seen it where, Bob's Real Fine Paper Mill wanted to have Bob's representative there when you did your test. Complying with the requirements of an engineered product. There's a lot of specifications out there that cover different types of manufactured equipment. Sometimes they're used by companies. Sometimes they're never even heard of. But one of the requirements that oftentimes happen is somebody writes their own internal specification, an engineer does, and all he says is all welders must be certified. I've done back and forth communication over the years with OEMs that had that in there, and they didn't really know what it meant. They just said their welder had to be certified. And one guy might be welding on a 2-inch diameter piece of 250 wall tube, and another guy may be welding rebar to something. And they think that just being certified makes it magic. And then the same type of requirement we'd already talked about for companies is compliant with law, industry code standards, that kind of stuff. Next one is required by educational institutions, student credentials, CENS, AWS certified welder. All of those things can be things that that we'll come across as instructors where we've got to meet that requirement. So that's where it's kind of required. Teacher credentials. Each CTE organization, I imagine the state varies widely. But in Virginia, for instance, a while back, I assisted some instructors with getting AWS CENS entry-level welder documentation, both for the written portion and also for the practical, because that was one of the requirements for an interim CTE teacher that hadn't met all of the other requirements yet. If they got that, they could continue practicing like they were. The AWS certified welder, that's one that's mentioned actually in the Tennessee requirements as an option for me. That was one of the things that made it a little bit easier for me to get the interim position and move over to the full-time, because I had that requirement met already. And I think that was just one of the options besides having some type of degree or something like that. Look at the chat real quick.
Did I hear you say that I am from the state of Virginia, an educator here at CWI, but
Yep.
did I hear you say it's now a requirement for educators in CTE programs to be a CWI?
No, it's an option if you're unlicensed.
Okay.
So the two cases that I had, one of them was just an ag teacher that swapped over to teaching a full-time welding program, and the other guy was an auto mechanics teacher that swapped over when the welding instructor left. So he rolled over into that program, but had to get credentialed that way because he couldn't complete his full licensure for that specific skill. And I think they gave him a window of 2 or 3 years to get that. And then I think there was another window on top of that where they had to eventually meet all the other requirements.
Right, it's a 3-year.
Yeah.
Get licensed.
I've got 3 years myself to get my teaching license, actually the college credit, but they didn't really give an option on the other one. It was just like a prerequisite for me to fall into the part where I could teach.
The state of Virginia has actually changed that requirement on the 3-year.
Do they?
9 credit hours.
I know that.
The 9 credit hours now they've lightened up on that, and they're accepting work experience in replacement for that.
Cool. I can barely hear you, but yeah, and I think the requirement that they put in there for CENS is something that's over the past few years. I don't think it's always been like that. I know that when I looked up the requirements, that it was a relatively new document that they put out.
Yeah, I've been teaching the CENS program for about 15 years, and I've had really good success with it.
Yeah, that's the thing, that the programs don't necessarily have to be CENS programs, but the instructors had to be CENS entry-level welders. That was one of the credential options, which, to me, I don't know if I'd throw that term out there that I was an entry-level welder as an instructor. I'd kind of keep that one on the down low. Even though I know that it means more than AWS certified welder in some cases. So another time is industry recognized certification for DOE requirements, grants. From what I understand, there's Perkins money that's available if you're putting out an industry recognized credential. I've asked here about it. I don't know it. I just get told that we got to have industry recognized credentials here for our students, and there's money available for that. We, for instance, get $200 per student for certification testing. Have an outside party come in and do it, through an ATF, and they can do the AWS certified welder option, or I can do the CENS program. I'm not doing CENS quite yet until I get 2 or 3 years of students that have been with me for that long behind me. Down here it says NCCR. I've got it written in here. Is anybody, it's a trick question, by the way, anybody doing NCCR certification for welders?
I am an NCCER trainer.
Yeah.
Never use it.
Okay, yeah. I was wondering, like I said, there's a misconception out there that the NCCR has a certification program for welders, and they do not. They have the NCCR core, but that's also one of the options that I think are available out there for some of the industry credentials, is doing that core part of it, but that's outside the scope of any welder testing.
The other thing with NCCR is the testing agency that they use is wholly owned by Prentice Hall.
I thought it was pure.
So, somewhat misleading when they say it's a third-party credentialing. It's actually just an arm of the same organization.
Yeah.
So is there, so to speak, like certifications through, I mean, I've heard of NCCR, but is there, so to speak, like certifications like AWS?
They're supplementary. So NCCR, when I worked for the government, they had us go become NCCER, and it seemed to be for the, mostly because of the environmental laws that were coming about. They wanted to make sure you knew the newest, save the world, save the environment kind of stuff. But that's all I've ever used it for. But it's all supplementary to AWS.
Many of their craft-related programs do have certification. So you'll see construction companies asking for NCCR pipe fitters, NCCR carpenters, that kind of stuff. And they do have a certification program for that. But there is not a certification from NCCR for welding specifically, where they administer, supervise, or even document a performance qualification test. It's not out there.
NCCER is primarily a construction trade.
Yeah, I knew that. I just wasn't sure if they had like a D11 test, you know, like they do in the AWS.
They actually deferred all of that stuff to the Sense program. I went through my instructor training for them about 3 years ago, and that was one of the questions that I had directly for the sponsoring agency. And then I ended up calling NCCR and was told that when they were in development, Sense was going to do the welding, and they were going to handle all their other trades. So
Gotcha.
Someone just posted up there knocking. Matter of fact, I'm making a revised copy of this presentation that'll be online. It'll be a little SCORM thing where you can click through it at your own pace. But I mentioned Nocti in there as being one.
Yeah.
And there, like I said, I'm sure, we could make Gerald's Real Fine certification program if we wanted to. It's just whether it's industry recognized or not. But really, when it gets down to it, from the people that I've spoken to in industry, in my region and other regions where I lived, if I mentioned, hey, I've got some students that are AWS Sense completers, they don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, they just don't. And I could say I've got some students that are AWS certified welders. They don't necessarily know what it means, but it sounds cooler. It's just, oh, okay, well, that's good. But when it gets down to it, they don't necessarily, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of manufacturers, they don't even keep subject matter experts in the world of welding employed. They've got not all of them, but a few of them, they don't have that. They don't know what they need. They just know they need a certified welder.
Back in the 80s, I did certification for Ingersoll Rand. I wrote their welding procedures. I did all their new hire testing and did all their certification. And it was done through the college. So they got a welder certification sheet from the college with me as the examiner.
Yep. So once we put our name on it, we'll talk about that. We talk about what is certified. Once we put our name on something and sign it, that's a certificate, period. Required student experience of testing. To me, that's one of the best places where we can do welder qualification testing, or the best reasons for doing it is for giving your student the experience of taking a test, especially if somebody else is looking at it. Okay, that's unmatched, especially if they're doing it as a group where everybody's doing the test, because then the pressure becomes a little bit bigger, in my opinion. So that's one of the purposes of it. Other person required if AWS certified welder. So you can't do it yourself if you want to call your students AWS certified welders. We'll talk a little bit more about that title in a minute, but you got to be a CWI. It's got to be done through an ATF, but it's still good experience, even if it's just somebody from industry come in and say, hey, I want you to witness these tests and tell me what you think. That's a good experience for a student, having that extra pressure, in my opinion. For the sense testing, the teacher can do that. You can do that certification. And you can actually do that sense test if you do it properly and document it well. Can also be an AWS D1.1 welder performance qualification test. Okay. The requirements for the sense test, as far as acceptance criteria, meets the requirements for AWS D1.1. Okay. There's nothing that says you can't do one test and qualify 20 different codes, provided you meet the requirements of all of those codes. So who can perform it? Responsibility for qualification always falls with the employer or the company. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have to do it, but a company, a manufacturer, a contractor, construction company, whatever it is, every code book that I've ever looked in, put that responsibility with them. Doesn't mean necessarily they've always got to do it, but they're going to be responsible for it. Okay, now I'm sure there's folks out there that have been in some types of litigation and that kind of stuff, saying where a welder was certified by someone else and they become responsible. I've never heard of it. I've never been able to find documented cases of it. I've heard people say, well, what if it comes back on you as the welding inspector? I'm not scared. Okay, I document the welder performance qualification test, and I do it as meeting the requirements of the code. What happens with the welder after that is up to the manufacturer, the contractor. If they accept that certification, they put that guy to work, that's their deal, period. That's an opinion for sure, and that's one that can go strong both ways. But I've never seen an exception in a code book for the responsibility for welding and the responsibility for qualification being passed on to some other entity or organization. I'm talking D11, 1104, all the D1 codes for the most part. But a company can often subcontract that testing. So even though they're responsible for it, they don't necessarily have to do it. Now there's some exceptions to that, and I may have another slide for it, but ASME Section 9, for instance, it explicitly requires the company to supervise the welder qualification testing, period. Now, it does mention explicitly that you can subcontract the preparation of the materials, documentation, the testing, and inspection. But as far as who watches the welder weld, as far as ASME Section 9 goes, it's the manufacturer or the contractor. So qualification for who can do the testing. Each code has different requirements in it for qualification of inspectors. Sometimes those codes in their sections do not address explicitly the person that's doing the supervising of the welder qualification test. Okay, but there are no cases where the person the people that are responsible for inspection of general product can't do the qualification testing. But in most cases, it's actually a little bit less. It's a little bit more vague as far as the welder testing. It doesn't even address it per se. In most cases, a CWI is not required. Anybody know where a CWI is required for a welder qualification test? I know one of y'all should.
Visual testing? Yeah,
but in a case where a CWI has to do the welder testing or has to do the inspection. And for the most part, except for the AWS Certified Welder Program, there's not a requirement that the person giving the test, doing the inspection, be it the visual or the destructive testing, or even filling out the documentation, has to be an AWS CWI. It's not in there. It's not in D1.1. It's not in any of the D codes. Now, it's in there as options for qualification of inspectors. But as far as, hey, this person's welder qualification paper is not valid because it's not stamped by CWI, you got better be careful bringing that one up and assuming that that's somewhere in a code, because it's not. Okay. And the exception for that is the AWS Certified Welder Program. Even though that AWS Certified Welder Program may be doing the welder test by D1.1, the AWS QC4 and QC7 require a CWI to do the inspection and witness the test. So here's a little bit more detail on what it says. D1.1 says each manufacturer contractor, I'll let y'all read it. That might get me a drink of water, but that says it.
Hey,
The
Gerald,
web, yes, sir.
when we've come across someone wanting a CWI or someone that's qualified, when they're reviewing welder qualifications, it's usually when someone comes and does an audit. Sometimes you'll see it in ISO.
Yeah.
Come and do an audit, they'll have a list. They'll say, is the person that's certified, the welder is qualified to do the qualifications, and what are their credentials?
Yep. And the CWI is definitely an easy one to throw out there. That one kind of, you know, it's well documented and assumed, but I think I've got another slide that talks about that a little bit. But yeah, that's a, you know, that's a good way to do it. And that's one of the things about the, you know, if go forward and if enough of y'all are interested in going through some training, we can get you trained up on how to do a specific test or a specific testing by a code. And then that could be your documented training. You know, there's a lot of different ways to go about becoming qualified based on training. And this could be one. You know, put your picture up there so they know you're you, and boom, you can say, hey, I sit and listen to this guy talk for an hour and a half. Maybe it won't go that long.
Well, if you guys are familiar with the WIS certification, have you guys heard of the WIS, WIA that the AWS allows? It's called a Welding Inspector Specialist.
Oh yeah, the B5 point. I can't remember what it is now, but yeah, it's yeah, it's got some good details in there too.
Yeah, it allows companies and corporations and educational facilities to create your own internal qualification of inspectors as long as it mirrors the same format of the CWI program. So that's another way that you can, if you're going to self-certify, or if a company or an educational facility, if they have that procedure in place and they can show that, it would be a viable document to show someone that has or questions your ability to give welding tests.
Yeah, if you're going through, you know, it's kind of interesting when you mentioned ISO. I did just a welding type audit at a company that had ISO certification, and back in the early 90s when I got involved with it, it was like document everything and say what you do what you say stuff. And then I went up there and I asked the guy, I said, you guys got any written welding procedures? No. He said, I said, how do you know what you do on this specific, it was mining equipment. He said, well, we've been doing these for years. This is how we do it. And I tell them. I said, well, what about your welder qualifications? Do you do anything on that? No, we don't have anything in writing on it. I just watch them weld. And then once I say they're okay, then we let them weld on it. It was, you know, it kind of blew my mind, but they didn't even have their own written program. You know, if you're going to test welders, I strongly suggest you write down how you're going to do it. And that's one of the things that we cover in the training. You know, I've got my own format. When I write a quality manual for an ATF, I cover certain things certain ways, just because that's how I like them. When I do my own testing, even though I'm not an ATF yet, till I get that spare $3 or $4 grand to blow, I'm not going to be one. But when I do regular welder testing for industry, I still do it that same way. You know, I've got the same setup, the same documentation that I'm going to provide, same material control, that kind of stuff, same paperwork the welder's got to sign. So D1.1, here's their qualification requirements for an inspector. Now, this is not out of the clause for performance qualification, but it could be argued very easily that if you're inspecting a welder qualification, you should meet the requirements. So the very bottom one, number 3 down here, that's the one that opens up the door for just about anybody to say they meet the requirement. In my book, if it's not documented, your training or your experience, then it's not there. But that's just the way my audit brain works. I can write it down and someone else can decide whether that's the case or not. But also the QC1 for CWIs and the Canadian Welding Bureau certification also meet that.
You know what's funny, Gerald, is I have an instructor I go to out in Missouri. He's got a CWB, but the Canadian one does not see the CWI.
No. Yeah, there's no reciprocity or whatever it is. So AWS accredited test facilities, already mentioned it before, must utilize the CWI as a test supervisor. If, whenever QC 47, the new standard for ATFs, I don't know how many y'all are ATFs or work with them, but when that comes out, then the requirement's going to be for the CWI to have the qualifier endorsement. And that can be taken at a Prometric test center, and it's not terribly hard. It's a lot of jumping around, stuff like that, but the electronic books really make a big difference. So who can perform testing? ASME Section 9 had no requirements for the supervisor of welder qualification tests until 2019. Now they do have a requirement in there for the person that's supervising the welder qualification test to have. I think they use that same training and experience requirement, but they do address it a little bit better than they used to. A thing about doing ASME Section 9 qualifications, usually if a company is going to be doing work in accordance with one of the ASME codes of construction, even if it's a non-stamp required one, they should have a written quality system. So when companies come to me and ask me, say, hey, I want to qualify my welders so we're meeting the code, I begin to throw out there that, hey, there's more to meeting the code than just having your welder qualified. If you're going to start doing welder qualification testing for companies through your school or even through yourself, just be aware of making sure that they understand that there's much more to it. And of course, there's another slide on that. Companies may have different requirements based on their quality system. Make sure that you're aware of them if you're going to do testing for them. Each individual industry, there's a company here that makes fifth wheels for tractor trailers. Their welding test is a single pass fillet weld with a start and a stop in the middle of 5/16 fillet weld, just like the D1.1 test. But they require 10% penetration into the base metal. Okay, so if they would have called me and said, hey, we do this test, and I didn't ask enough questions, next thing you know, I'd be documented that they met those requirements for D1.1, but they didn't meet their company requirements. Talking with a company about what they require is a good idea. So make sure you understand it. You're talking about the reciprocity with CWB, and I'm probably sure it probably goes the same other way too. Not every CWI or SCWI understands what they have to do to do welder performance qualification testing properly. I've reviewed paperwork, and I'm not an expert on it, okay? Again, don't confuse my enthusiasm with skill or ability. But I've done reviews of paperwork that was made by individuals that were senior CWIs that didn't have qualification ranges that matched what the code said was allowed at the time that code was in effect. So that's not all. Just because you got a CWI doesn't mean it's happening right. The difference about AWS ATFs is they've been audited and they have a system in place that's in writing. Doesn't necessarily mean their welder test is any harder. An AWS D1.1, 3G, 4G, 7018 test done at ATF is no harder than the one that's done in the back of the pickup truck from Bob's Real Fine Welder Testing. Only difference is ATF, you got a lot more paperwork you got to put up with, and you're going to be registered with the American Welding Society, so it's going to make things a little bit better for you. Is welder testing all that's required? Products require quality welds. Remember I mentioned it before. Code book's got about 6 pages or 4 pages of text and a few charts and tables for D1.1, yet it's over an inch thick. There's a lot more in there about doing quality welding and complying with the code than just having a welder qualified. It's not like being a master plumber. I can open that up. But in this PowerPoint, this will bring you to just a list of D1.1 table of contents, and you can kind of see some of the paragraphs, a few that there are. I'm not going to risk it. A company's internal program doesn't reference an external code or standard if they've got one. make sure that it kind of covers what they need for their product, but that's not your decision. That's where engineering groups come in. You can't make that decision as a welding inspector saying, well, I think this is the test they got to take. Okay. If they just say we need certified welders and that's all that they say, I suggest preaching on there's more to it than just having your welder certified. You know, there's design and engineering, material control, process, welding, inspection, fabrication. Those are all happen to be the clauses out of D1.1 also. Those are some bullets you can use if you're going to do testing for somebody else. That those things affect whether something is a good product or not. So this picture right here, that's a 6-inch steel scale going through a backing strip. That is a weld that was done by an AISC erector with a certified welder with paperwork for AWS D1.1. Okay. And it's like that all the way down. This was a 16-inch column that they had to splice to take down for something, and they put it back up. And the first thing that caught my eye was there's no heat marks on the back of the backing strip. So I just randomly kind of reached over there out of the man basket and slid that 6-inch scale all the way through it. It's like that's the full length of the weld. That was a certified welder. Don't put your faith in the fact that the welder's certified. Good welding quality management is much more to it than here, dude certified, turn him loose. Because if I'm so-called certified or qualified and documented, which is the same as certified, and I'm trying to feed my family, and my superintendent says, Gerald, just cap it off or you're fired. Well, now it probably wouldn't matter. But maybe when I was 19 or so, it might have mattered. But you're going to do whatever your employer suggests that you do for the most part. So there's a lot of, you know, just because the person has a credential doesn't necessarily mean they have the ethics or the desire to do what they know is right versus do what their boss told them. That can be a tough decision. You know, it's easy for us to sit back here and say, well, I wouldn't do that or I wouldn't do this. But when it comes down to losing your job, it can be a difficult decision. You know, your foreman tells you, well, I've been welding columns up for 20 years and we just cap them off and don't even bevel them. You're young, trying to feed your family. Be careful. So, you know, and I use this, like I said, to talk to companies and say, just having your welder certified doesn't necessarily mean that you're controlling your welding right. There's more to it. So everybody has probably heard or talked about the certification versus qualification thing. These are from the American Welding Society terms and definitions. I use the term certified welder, meaning that it's got some kind of written documentation saying that a weld met some requirements. That is a certified welder. I've seen arguments on forums and discussions and stuff like that talking about qualified versus certified. And again, I become certified when somebody puts something in writing saying that I met some requirement, period. Okay. I could be certified in accordance with Gerald's Real Fine Barbecue Grills and Trailer Hitches program, or certified in accordance with ASME Section 9. Qualification is the test. A person is qualified if they've got the skills. They're certified when someone writes it down on a piece of paper. Anybody ever heard it any different or heard bigger, more detailed arguments about what one is or what one isn't?
I just read an article. I don't know where I have it. Patrick Snyder actually wrote it on welder qualification versus certifications. I'll put the link in the chat box.
Does it say the same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. He does go into a little bit more detail on certifications, just on like ATFs, and it explains it just a little bit more. So
I think I've got one. You know, when you hear somebody use that term AWS certified welder, and like I said, I'm pretty sure there's a slide on it. That gives me the impression that they are certified and that record's maintained by the American Welding Society. But oftentimes what it means is maybe a CWI put their name on it and stamped it. Maybe it was done in accordance with D1.1 or in accordance with some AWS code, and so people will throw out that AWS certified welder term. When in reality, that title is kind of, in my book, reserved for someone that's gone through it at an ATF. Doesn't mean it's any better, but it sounds cooler, and somebody paid extra money for having that registration in their database, then I don't like everybody else throwing it around. You know, I use the term certified in accordance with AWS D1.1 or that kind of stuff.
For sure. Our students, I mean, it's probably across the board, but students come in, and I teach at post-secondary. I need to have a certification in this and this and this and this. And I say, slow down a little bit. You need a qualification, and you'll be in the same boat. What do you mean? Well, I can write a piece of paper for you that says you're certified in Gerald's barbecue hitches and blah, 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 blah. You're too good at that, by the way.
I've been using that company for a long time.
It's just funny how, I mean, and I don't know where students get it from, but man, I have to be certified.
Cameron, I think I know where they get it from. Being post-secondary too, as we are here at Hobart, I hear a lot of the for-profit colleges. I'm not going to name any names of anyone's, but there's a lot out there that go around saying you're going to become certified out of our program. And, you know, I hate to say it, but a lot of those people that they hire in for certain colleges, they think they know welding, but they're really, a lot of them, I hate to say it, but no offense to anybody, but a lot of them think that I think they're car salesmen, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also see ads for welders must be certified. I also see welding shops alongside the highway. They'll say certified welder. And it's probably the guy with the barbecue grill and the trailer hitch. Certified.
I know that the principals of the schools that feed into us, they don't want to send their kids and pay for them to go to a school that they're not getting a certification from, or, you know, so sometimes it's even the schools themselves that are putting that pressure for that title.
Well, I said for us to get Perkins money, I'm pretty sure, or some type of money, and I don't know. I haven't looked at it. I've only been here for a year. But when I talked about not worrying about doing certifications, I would rather my students be able to pass any tests they gave as opposed to have papers that said they did. You know, it was hinted that we get funding that way. So, you know, when I go to the Tennessee Department of Education website and look, AWS Sense is listed as an industry recognized credential, and so is AWS Certified Welder. So you get, you know, and I mean, we do a AWS D1.3 single pass fillet weld lap joint right here for some of them. 2-inch long weld, break it open, fuse to the root, good to go. Okay, it's a no-brainer. They get the title of AWS Certified Welder out of it, and it makes everybody here happy. But I know what it means. I mean, I know what any welder qualification. It's a piece of paper. I've stressed them before, different people. I've been welding for a long time, and the only time that I ever used the only time a piece of paper was ever of value to me as a welder was getting in the Boilermakers Union. That's it. Okay, I had records of welder performance qualification from non-union boiler contractors and from the Navy that allowed me to go into a union hall on Thursday and get sworn in on a Tuesday, I think it was. And I went to the top of an apprentice list with a couple thousand people waiting because I could already weld.
Oh, God.
So it helped then. But, you know, I try to stress to my students, don't show up with no paper and tell them about your certification. Show up with your hood glove and say, hey, let me show you I can weld.
Yep.
Go like that. But our industry, or industry in general, they like those credentials. They think that
one of the problems is that many states and systems have gone to requiring capstone experiences.
Yeah.
And you can get a certification from automotive, you get a certification for hospitality, you get a certification from a lot of things. Welding is different. We give qualifications. And some states and some systems won't recognize a welder qualification as being the same as certification. And like you said, Gerald, you get a certain amount of money back for every student that passes certification. One of the schools that I'm on an advisory committee, the last advisory committee told everyone that they're having the students get a certification in some area like diversity or public relations or something, has nothing to do with welding, but they're doing it in one day at the end of the welding program. So every student comes out has a certification paper, not in welding, but they earned it in the welding class. And so this program still gets the money.
The NCCR core curriculum, that's one of the options that some Department of Education in different jurisdictions has as acceptable. The OSHA 10. And I mean, the OSHA 10 course is great, don't get me wrong. But if I'm out on the job as a safety inspector and a welding inspector, and somebody comes in with OSHA 10 that did it in 10th grade or 12th grade, and they've never worked in industry, I'm sorry. That's a useless piece of paper. You know, that's just all there is to it. It doesn't benefit them any. It's great that they've been through the training, but it's just a piece of paper. But we are definitely paper driven as far as, you know, and I think part of that comes from individuals that aren't really familiar with what we do, wanting to get their own warm fuzzy without knowing anything about it. You know, they've got that thing to fall back on and say, oh, well, it says right here he was certified. Well, it's just a piece of paper that says they made a weld one day that met certain requirements. So that's why I said I want the.
Gerald.
Hey, Jason. I see your text message. What is the CWP that you're talking about there?
Certified Welding Program is what I was meaning. I was just abbreviating it.
Okay, so
what you was talking about, so ATL.
Okay, so what I looked at, and that's actually how we've done ours for the past 3 years, because I actually did the testing for them. Is I came in, I worked for an ATF, and I came in and administered the tests as an AWS ATF, and that's actually how we did ours.
Right.
Because the option for stints was a hard one.
Back earlier, a couple years ago, we tried to do some WPQ with the students, which we done that, and we were fine. The students got their certification, but the CTE people said we couldn't get any Perkins funding, back for it because they didn't recognize it. The welder procedure qualification, welder performance qualification. They said it had to be through a ATL.
Yeah.
Like
that's how it's written in the standard. So, but to me, just doing a welder performance qualification test with them that meets D1.1 is just as far as them going out in industry is just as good as the AWS certified welder as far as demonstrating skill. But that fact that I can give them my certified welder number and then go look it up online, that's a big bang for the buck for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's a nice one. So we're working towards our ATF just for that reason. We had the audit schedule, but it hadn't happened yet. It may not ever happen now. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. Thank you, Jason. Move on to the next slide. Again, the welder certification and written verification. That written verification is important. That's the thing. Okay, just because somebody signs for it, though, if you don't have a document that tells you what they did, then it's also of no value. But when it says they met a specific requirement, you've got something that goes on pretty good that should hold some weight. But again, I don't know if any of y'all have ever come across anybody that's says they passed the test but has no skill. You can tell by watching them weld that they've never done that specific test. I mean, it's happened with me. I may have told the story before. I was working for a community college up here as a consultant, and they asked me to test some folks for a gas company that had been getting tested for years at that school. And they had to do a 6G, 60-10 downhill all the way out. When I told them to tack that thing up in the 6G position, them boys thought I was crazy. They didn't know what I was talking about. So they said, I asked them, I said, well, how'd you do it before? We tacked it together, we laid it down on the table, and we rolled it around and welded the inside and ground the outside and welded the outside. Well, I had dudes' records of welder qualification from the instructor that was up at that college going back a few years saying that they passed it, and it specifically said 6G downhill 6-inch schedule 40. But those two welders had never seen that happen before. And and all they did was they just welded the branch connections on small gas lines, 5 psi, if that much. I don't even think they're that high. But but they still didn't pass. And I kind of got semi-scolded about it because they'd been coming to the school for all that period of time. I had just helped that school become ATF. I wasn't about to start faking nothing. It wasn't no skin off my back if they didn't know how to weld. Bless their hearts. All right. So anyway, and I go through this slide with companies, certified welder most abused in the industry. You can see that, you can read through my long-winded stuff right there, but I've already preached on most of it. Very key point, welder being certified, not any type of assurance that a weld will meet a certain level of quality. That's important for us to know when we're giving tests, when we're talking to companies about doing testing for them, or even in schools. Okay. And again, this bottom one, there are no codes or specifications that only require that. There's just not. Okay. They're not in the industry related to ones that are any industry organization has put their name on. There's other requirements for doing the welding. I've already talked about that. Tell this to the welders: if you're a welder, don't expect to be handed a job because you passed a test sometime in the past. Okay, that's the past. I tell this to my students: the company doesn't want to see my welding skills, they don't need to see them. Okay, if they're not going to give me a welding test, even if it's just a visual, let's just say they accept my AWS certified welder for flux core that I got. If they don't want to see me set up the machine and run a bead or two with it, I'm probably scared of them because they probably don't have anybody in the company that cares about welding like I do, and we're probably not going to get along and play well.
That's right.
Obviously, if I'm starving and the dogs are wandering through the street trying to find something to eat and I can't feed mama, yeah, I might do what I got to do, but for the most part,
If you call Andrew Murray, please.
for the most part, I try to stress that to my students just to let them realize that it's just a piece of paper. Showing up with the skills is much better than a piece of paper.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So different places to learn some more about welder testing, and we're going to talk, let you have some questions if you got some specifics about how to do certain types of tests. Weld inspection technology book that you can buy from AWS has got a section in there on qualification. It's a great thing to go through to get familiar with some of the different requirements. But again, it's not the same as the code book that you're going to use. AWS Welding Handbook, Volume 1, 8th, 9th, 10th edition, have all got sections on there about in quality control and performance and procedure qualification both. Both of the AWS forums, the old one and the new one, tremendous place to ask questions if you've got something out there that you want to know about welder testing. And then the last thing, I'm thinking about doing a course. Again, we talked about it at the beginning at Welding Classroom, at one of my websites, weldingclassroom.org. Trying to decide on a fee or not. I ain't gonna fool y'all. I want to make some money. I don't want to make a killing, but I also do put a lot of time into that stuff. If somebody's interested in doing some training for welder qualification testing, obviously we can't get together hands-on easily, but if you're in Tennessee, we can arrange for you to come up here on a Saturday and do some of the actual hands-on stuff. But what we're mainly going to focus on is the code requirements, what they say for material control, what they say for supervising the test, what the acceptance criteria is, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of wives' tales out there about what's required on a test. There's a lot of things that are suggested but not necessarily required. They get advertised as required. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen folks make in industry is doing a 2-inch Schedule 80 pipe test. Any idea what that mistake may be? Anybody? Using the same die they used on their 3/8-inch plate test. I've walked into more than 2 or 3 shops and did a 2-inch Schedule 80 pipe test, and they bent it on a mandrel that's supposed to be used for 3/8 wall. blade or a side bend. So it doesn't get the required 20% elongation. Most of the codes require 20% of elongation in the outer fibers of the bend specimen. And, that's just one of the things that you need to consider. If you're going to start testing welders in accordance with a specific code, make sure that you understand how they've got to be mechanically tested. Anybody got any questions?
So if they would be interested, I did go and take the CWI a few years back, the test. I did the 5-day, and I was very frustrated because it was not designed for a welding instructor. It was designed for somebody coming out of industry who had used code before. So, we spent 4 days learning theory, which is what I teach every day, and then 4 hours learning anything about the code book. Yeah. And the first hour was just putting tabs in it. So it was just very frustrating to me because I didn't really learn anything about code, which was the part I needed.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the courses that I've seen are related to passing the test. And it's just like if I was to go out there and teach one of my students how to just do a single V groove weld in the 3G position. They may be able to do that and do that very well. But if I haven't had them do a horizontal pad weld yet, they're not going to be able to weld very good in certain conditions. And we can't cover it all. I mean, for sure, welding-wise or inspection-wise, both. But it's something that we got to be aware of when we're training people and when we're taking some type of training. Hang on just a second. I'm going to post this one page that I got right here. This is similar to what we just went through. It's a little bit more, the PowerPoint that's on this one is a little bit longer, but it'll kind of give you, some more opinion, that kind of stuff. It's a LinkedIn page, so anybody ought to be able to see it for the most part. But Mr. Porter mentioned something about, I've also been trying to do a part B training up here. So if anybody is working towards either taking their CWI exam again for part B, or maybe taking the beginning, taking it again, I'm looking to do a Saturday class up here. So if anybody's interested in that, definitely holler at me. And again, I said, I'm looking to make money off of this, but not a killing. This is my fun hobby thing that I do. But if I could justify my wife why I spend 3 hours on a computer at night, it would make life much, much easier for me. But any of those things are definitely doable. But if you ever have questions about welder qualification testing and you want to talk to somebody that's made mistakes doing it, you can holler at me because I've made some. Okay. I've made some even working for an ATF that had written procedures in place that I wrote. I wrote them. Okay. I wrote them to explicitly say, before I give the test, I will verify the MIC, what's called the MIC number on the filler metal and document it on the paperwork. Okay. So we had 4 machines set up. They're identical machines. They're machines that I was responsible for setting up. And I worked part-time for them as a contractor. I came in, I saw the machines, flipped them open, saw the flux core wire was on there. I saw that it was E71T1. And I went ahead and tested 2 groups of 4 welders. After it was over, one of the guys said, I couldn't get my settings just right. It ran kind of rough. And I looked at the settings. They were in the ballpark. But the wire that he had was not the same wire from Lincoln. It ran slightly different. It was 71T1. It looked the same, but it was off. So that was one case. I didn't even have a MIG number on that. It had been swapped. Same thing happened with MIG wire. I gave tests for MIG, and all the solid wire was on the machines. It was all marked Lincoln. I did all the ordering. So I went ahead and let them run. Got through the test. It said the same thing. I can't get my machine set right.
There's an envelope on top.
I had to go to the extreme on the amperage.
There's an envelope on top.
I said, it works fine.
Thank you. I
I let
appreciate
him do
it.
his test. Told him just do it or he could wait for another machine. Machine's calibrated, so I wasn't figuring why that is. After it got done, I noticed that there was no MIC number written on that roll of wire. MIC number 10, as a matter of fact, in case you was wondering. And one of the manufacturers that we supported came in and wanted to set up a procedure for 045 solid wire. We typically used 035 for those specific tests. So they swapped the wire size over and I didn't pay no attention to it. So in both of those cases, I was pretty much an idiot because I had my own procedures in place that I had written that I didn't follow. Okay. And it's, I don't know, it's easy for me to do because it's easy to say, okay, well, nobody else has been in my shop. Nobody else has swapped out wire on my machines. But I didn't ask that question. It looked kind of like what it was. So having written steps in place and being conscientious of how easy it is to make mistakes is important. That's just my opinion, though. Someone said, what's your opinion on ATF? I've been considering this. It's like any other welding testing program as far as what has to be done. Now, the exception be for the supplement C and supplement F. The supplement F requirement is, I think, for the piping facility or for pipe welding. Someone that goes through and takes the tests that are in there, they've exhibited skill above and beyond what ASME Section 9 requires. ASME Section 9 is the easiest code that there is to pass a welder qualification test to. It doesn't get any easier, period. It doesn't. Exception might be for some of the API stuff. No, it's not even, because I think for a welder qualification test, it's got to be complete penetration all the way around. But anyway, it doesn't get any easier than that. But in the supplement F, that's part of the QC 4 document, or QC 7 document, I'm sorry, it requires you to do tests with restrictions. There's limited restrictions you've got to have around outside of the joint. I think one of the other tests requires you to cut and bevel it, similar to what API requires on some of them. So there's some things that can make it better. But as an ATF, you've got more paperwork to manage. You've got to manage your materials a little bit better. And you've got to, say it, there may be probably someone from AWS may watch this. You've got to feed the cash cow, okay? You've got to send them the money. A few grand to get it done. But my experience has been this. I still get calls today from people that see the information for the first community college that I helped become an ATF. That is not ATF anymore. They shut it down not long after I'd left. Not because I was great. It's just because they, didn't find necessarily anybody else to do it. But I still get phone calls from that. I've generated a pretty good bit of revenue just because someone's looking for Gerald Austin in Northeast Tennessee to do welder qualification testing. So if you go to the list of ATFs and you're thinking you need to have an AWS certified welder, well, you go to their website, you click on that list of ATFs and you put your state in, boom, your school pops up or your organization pops up. That can be, pretty good deal. So there's some value in it that way, but I can tell you this, I've never seen one make a ton of money at it. For us as a high school, it's a great benefit because we can go from the $200 cost per student to get a test done to just paying the CWI to come in, and we'll manage the test because we're not going to be doing it. We can test our own students as an organization. We cannot test our own students as the CW, as a welding inspector, as the qualifier. So that qualifier's got to come in and follow our written quality system, which has been approved by AWS. And then we can pass that same benefit on to other schools. So the way that I write the quality manual up, it allows for off-site testing. That off-site testing means I can show up at another high school with my amp meter, okay, my documentation that they provided me, check everybody's ID, get them to fill out the paperwork, and boom, I'm good to go. I've got to go get the door. If y'all want to hang around, we can talk some more. But I think that's one of my students coming back from Eaton, and she's going to practice a little bit more welding. I'll be right back, and we'll take but a minute.
the lady that was talking about the week-long AWS CWI training, my comment is that I did that and then didn't pass all parts of that and went on to do the Hobart 2-week seminar and made a world of difference.
Back, y'all got to stop talking about me now.
I did the Hobart about 5 years ago, 4 years. I don't remember when I did it. A few years ago, and I agree. It was a great 2-week.
It's just too much information for my little brain to handle in a 1-week AWS course. I had to have 40-hour train or at 80-hour training.
I've also got an article written on that. I got to sit in, and we paid for it, but I got to sit in on a course in North Carolina 2 years ago because my boss had wanted me to teach a CWI course. Because I had never taken one, I was hesitant to do it. And I told her, I said, if you'll send me to a course just so I can get some ideas, that'd be great. Well, my opinion, and it's written down, I think it's Welding, one of my other websites. But anyway, if I would have taken 5 years of experience out of what I had before I took the CWI exam in 90 and tried to sit through that class for a week, I wouldn't have made it. Okay, if I'd have just, even if I could have taken separate years out, where it wasn't all continuous, by that time I had 9 years of experience, 9 or 10 years experience in the welding industry, including 3 years of high school, 3 hours a day, Naval Nuclear Power Plant Components program, and working as a QC inspector for a boiler contractor. Okay, I was already doing inspection. If I would have pulled 4 or 5 years out and then tried to sit through that course, it would have been rough. Okay, it would have been a lot of stuff to take into my mind because I had gained fundamentals experience in high school and in the Navy, using codes in the Navy as a boiler contractor, doing actual inspection as a shop QAI in the Navy. So all of those things made it very, very, not very easy, but they really built on my knowledge. Whereas if I'd have taken, like I said, 5 years of that away and said, I'm going to go take this 1-week course, don't do it. Don't do it. If you've been welding for 30 years and you've never cracked a code book open, be prepared to be intimidated or saddened or whatever you may be, or overwhelmed by the information that they put in there in a week. It's good information, don't get me wrong. But I could see, there was a metallurgist in the class that I was in that had a welder come with him also. They both sat through the class. And I could see them, rubbing their heads. I mean, they were stressing because they were hearing things that they'd never heard before. So it can be intimidating to do that in 2 weeks. I suggest starting to train now. And, welder performance qualification is only a small, very, very small part of that. But start, if you're interested in becoming a CWI and you've got some experience inspecting, or you don't, start doing it now. Don't wait for the class thinking because you've been a welder or even a teacher for 20 years that you're going to drop off in that class in a week or even the 80-hour one and make it happen. I did a 100-hour class with 6 people, and I didn't have tremendous results, but the folks that put their time into it did better than the ones that didn't.
Gerald, they kind of throw some kind of what I hear from instructors, and I don't know, Cameron, I know you said you took it here, but I have a lot of instructors that don't have any problem with part A, but part B and C are the toughest for them because they teach every day, stuff out of part A, but B and C is probably that's what I hear, but that's just kind of my opinion. I'll throw that out there if anybody agrees with that or not.
I agree.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, part A, I shouldn't say this, but I didn't need to sit through most of what we went through in that 80-hour seminar, but learning how to decipher the code book and find the information and understand it was a huge benefit. And then going into part B, that just throws everybody for a loop because we've been studying this code book for I studied it for a long time, and then they give you a fake one If some of you haven't taken that test, not everything in that code book's the same as the D11 book or API 1104, depending on what you take, and it can make you confused and you think it's printed wrong sometimes.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I posted the link to one of the articles that I wrote because I started writing. Matter of fact, that's that picture though that you can see on the screen. That's that clip holding the stair landing up there at the building. That's the hotel. So led me to realize that special inspections in North Carolina are no better than they are in Tennessee.
Or Oregon. I've seen the same thing.
Yeah. I like to take whenever I go in a building. Sorry about that. I like to take the staircase. Even though I'll take it down more than I will up now, but just so I can go walk through there and see what the welding kind of looks like. But the part B is the good thing about the part B is you can get the book right now and start studying it. Okay, that's one of the things that I want to do on a Saturday class with folks. Isn't necessarily about getting the replicas and touching them and all that kind of stuff. We know how to use weld gauges. We know how to measure. It's a matter of applying that stuff that's in the code book. So my opinion on the book of specifications is this. As a welding inspector, you give me any code book I've never seen right now, and I'm going to spend a few hours with it, and I'm going to be ready to use it. It doesn't make a difference whether I've never seen it. But if I had seen it, I can use it more efficiently when I've got that time crunch on me where I've got to answer, so many questions in a certain period of time. So studying that book of specifications, if you're studying now, you should know that clause 1 is general, clause 2 is structural, clause 3 is pipeline, clause 4 is pressure piping, clause 5 is procedure qualification, and clause 6 is performance qualification. You should know those things off the top of your head. And not that you want to memorize what's in a code book, but you want to get familiar with what's in there. The great thing about it is you can download it as a PDF file and do a search in it and find every occurrence of the word undercut, okay, or whatever you may want to find an occurrence of. Well, that level of reading that term in different contexts between the different requirements that are in there for the products or for the performance and procedure qualification, it helps you learn that more. Makes you where you're not freaked out by that question about undercut. You'll know, hey, I've seen the requirements for procedure and performance qualification and for these 3 different categories of product. So getting that book now and downloading it is a good idea, in my opinion. Anybody got any questions though about welder qualification, something they've seen or they've doubted or they've questioned or they want to know how to do? You guys are all right.
Yeah.
Or maybe something you expected me to cover and maybe I didn't. I know that I mentioned B2.1 in the write-ups.
Sons of bitches.
And I decided not to do that just because I didn't want to get too deep into the code differences. But AWS B2.1 is American Welding Society's generic code for procedure and performance qualification. And it's one of those codes that you would use in the case where Bob's or Gerald's Real Fine Barbecue Grills and Trailer Hitches didn't have any industry requirements for his barbecue grills and his trailer hitches, but I wanted to certify my welders to a certain code. That's one that I could use. But I could also use D1.1. D1.1's got statements in there about OEMs using it for things outside of structural steel.
What about anybody looked into like doing endorsements or because if you CWI to D11 or anybody think about doing endorsements for like 1104 or any kind of other code? I mean, worth it or not?
I've never bothered with any, just because I did the one for the welder certification because I knew it was going to be something that would come up for an ATF, and I actually happened to be on. I was just I'm not actually a voting member on the committee, but I was in the committee. I saw the email come by that they were going to start sending out beta tests. So I do me. So it was nice because I didn't have to pay for it, and it was interesting. But that's the only endorsement I've got.
I've looked into him a little bit, but one of the other instructors, he's a pipe specific He did the 1104 when he took his code test, and I have the D11, and so we're able to reference each other and kind of go that route. So if we do have to have specific qualifications or training, we can go either direction on that.
I will say that, so when I went to test, somebody said to me, oh, you should just do the AP 11.1, because it's a smaller book and it'll be easier to get through. But it's a lot harder, I'm told, to read than the D1.1. So I don't know that it was really a benefit to go for the AP rather than the D1.
Yeah, there's actually an option though, and on the test, if you do the API 1104.
Oh, you froze.
Sorry. If you do the API 1104, there's a possibility or probability that you may have more questions on your test also. The number of questions, the way that it's written up, can vary a little bit.
If Gerald, with you doing the teaching, with that, like I was talking about with endorsements, have you ever thought about doing like a 1169 or any other code for there? Like any other different codes in piping or?
No, I mean, I've looked at them, and I'm not a, I don't know. I guess I'm not a credential kind of person, I reckon. I'd rather somebody think I don't have nothing and then find out I know what I'm talking about than have a bunch of stuff. And I have a hard enough time keeping my brain wrapped around stuff with stuff I think a CWI should know. So I don't work in the pipeline industry. I'd love to. If I thought I could get a job as a helper with somebody on a pipeline with 1169 or something like that, I would do it. It would be worth the money for me to do it. But other than that, it's not. It's it just hadn't helped me. It's not been one of those things that I've desired. It's kind of like having a degree. It'd be great for me to have one. I can't think of 4 years I would give up for it. But it definitely probably would have opened up some opportunities for me over the years. But like I said, the endorsement it's kind of like that welder certification thing. It gets your foot in the door sometimes. But I start stacking too much stuff on my resume. It's already 2 or 3 pages long because I can't keep a job. Put too much stuff on there, nobody even wants to read through it then.
But one thing that I've always thought about is all these companies, they want to hire people. They want to hire so many people because they know the retention rate's going to be low. But would you rather take quantity or would you rather take quality? Is kind of my thought.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance between hiring somebody that can really do a good job as a CWI, or hiring somebody. If you look at, and who knows, maybe somebody from industry. I call it dirt inspectors. The geotechnical companies that get in on the front end of field construction projects for steel buildings. They're looking for $20 an hour CWIs. They're not hiring, for the most part, experienced, higher paid CWIs, because from what I've seen in the steel construction industry for structural steel buildings, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't comply out there. I mean, there's a lot of it. Like I said, it was almost disheartening enough for where I don't even want to get involved in it, just because, yeah, sure, I can make some money, but it's not worth the pain and suffering that's involved with telling the contractor, you've got to chip the slag off your welds before I inspect them, kind of stuff. It's just not a good place for me to go. So I want to show you one other thing. I meant to throw this up earlier. If you're interested more in the subject and some of the ramblings of a madman related to welder qualification testing, this is what's called a mind map that I've got made up. That's just about some of the things that I would cover with somebody if I was going to be talking to them and training them to do welder qualification testing. So building your own program, to talk about having a written system, referring to AWSB 5.4, which is the generic standard for a testing facility that's referred to by QC4, QC7. talking about adding requirements. If you can expand each one of these out here, and it may be of interest to you, maybe something to generate some questions, some thoughts in your own mind. But it's something I like doing mind maps. I know they're not as neat and clean maybe as some other stuff. And this one's actually still in progress. But here's the default for most codes. Manufacturer, contractor tests their own welders. A WPS is required. Okay, you can't test a welder by any code that I'm aware of without having a written WPS. The other welding wives' tale that I didn't cover, and I meant to, like I said, I'm redoing this specific presentation is right here, but I didn't get it done in time to do it. However, the one welding wives' tale that's abused pretty regularly is, where would my map go? I don't know it, I lost it now. Is the fact that a welder has to qualify to a WPS. A welder does not qualify to use a WPS. A welder qualifies to make a production weld. For that welder to make a production weld, they have to have a WPS. But that welder does not necessarily have to be qualified to use that WPS within all of its ranges. So here's an example. I qualify an ASME Section 9 WPS. I take 2 pieces of flat plate, square groove, weld them together, flip them over, back gouge them on the other side, and weld it up. Okay, I can write a WPS for doing a 1/2-inch Schedule 80 pipe with that. Me, the welder that just welded up that procedure qualification test, I am not qualified to make that 1/2-inch Schedule 80 weld. But if the WPS is written up to use plate to weld on pipe and plate, which it can be, then I can do the plate qualification or the plate welding, provided it's back gouged or welded from both sides, has backing on it, and all the other variables are the same, the thickness. So even though I'm the welder that qualified that procedure qualification test, I'm not qualified to use that WPS within its entire range. You can go the other extreme. I take a qualified WPS that's written up for a single V groove, open root, and I weld it up, 1/2-inch thick. That's what the WPS is written for also. That WPS is only qualified for a 1/2-inch thick. I can't go weld on 2-inch thick stuff unless I get some other WPS that is qualified for 2-inch thick stuff. So the welder doesn't qualify to use a WPS. A welder qualifies for a set of ranges on a production weld. The procedure has to overlap down here for whatever those ranges are. And then the welder qualification has to overlap down here, whatever those variables are. But you have to have a WPS when you test the welder. That WPS may be written to only do that 3G joint. That's fine. That welder is qualified to do other things. But they can't do it until they have a WPS. And they don't have to retest if that WPS has ranges outside of their qualification, provided they're only using it within the range that they're already qualified for. Did I confuse everybody? Or I might be preaching to the choir too.
Can I ask a question about buying WPS? AWS offers a WPS. I think it's called correct me if I'm wrong, an SWPS. I don't remember what that is.
That's correct. Standard WPS.
They're about $200. Is that something that, as an instructor, I have to buy in order to offer that WPS as a qualification for a kid?
You do to use it just for that purpose. You probably do. If you're an AWS Sense school, you get access to all of those. It's in a supplement now in QC. I can't remember what it is, but anyway, it's one of the supplements that comes with it. But if you want a WPS for just testing your welders and you want it to comply to a specific code like D1.1, then write an AWS D1.1 pre-qualified procedure, which takes about 15 minutes to do, and write it up just for the test is what I do. I write them up to where they're just specific for a welder qualification test. Good thing about that is I'm comfortable to give that to the welder or even to the company, and they see all the requirements. Like I write in on the back, that if you grind on it too much, I've got the option to stop you. The code doesn't say that. I put that in my documentation for giving a welder test. So I've got that option as the inspector to stop you. But you can write a pre-qualified WPS without testing if you follow the requirements of D1.1. For AWS B2.1, that's the code that they use to qualify those SWPSs. You can also qualify your own. If you buy an SWPS, you've got to realize that they're extremely limited. I can do a procedure qualification using the rules of B2.1, and I can write a whole lot of WPSs off of it, or one WPS with very wide ranges. But when I buy a SWPS, if you'll even notice on the title sometimes, it will say carbon steel to carbon steel with FCAW primarily pipe applications. You won't find any plate materials listed in there. You won't find any reference to using it on plate. Not saying you can't. I'm just saying what you cannot find on that document is that specific information. So
I was trying to design the welds I do for class to those WPSs, those SW, and then that would be the weld I would give as a qualification for a student. But am I correct in thinking that you're saying that if you buy the Sense training, that those would all be covered under that, or am I wrong?
Yeah. So I can show them to you, I think.
The WPSs that come with the Sense, so they're for education purposes only.
Yeah, they're exclusive to educational purposes.
But they're the exact same WPS that you would use in industry, but you can't use them for industry because that violates the copyright on them.
Yeah, you could only use them for your students.
Correct.
And they'll have there's a big watermark on the front of them. But if you're just doing them for training, it's the way to go. Okay, so here's the one for, what's the title?
Short circuit.
18 through 10 gauge, which is what I'd be like for the certified welder test we use. That one would cover me. Instead, I wrote a D1.3. You can also write pre-qualified procedures for other codes too. D1.3, the sheet metal code. You can write them up. You can even write them for D1.5 for the bridge code, but you can only do them for SMAW. That's the only pre-qualified process. But yeah, so they got the big watermark for educational purposes only. But they're available for the Sense schools, and they are for educational purposes. But you can still use them for a welder qualification test for a student. That's the educational purpose. You can't use them you couldn't use them for industry. Again, for industry, if you're going to be doing testing for industry, I would figure out which code it's going to be and start looking into that specific clause as far as what's required. ASME Section 9 and AWS B2.1 are very, very easy codes to qualify a welding procedure to. You don't have to do any non-destructive examination, for instance. Okay, so you can just weld the plate up, cut your bends out, cut your tensils out, get a machine, pull them, bend them, document them, and you're good to go. ASME Section 9, you can write up a wide range of procedures from that. AWS D1.1 is a little more complicated if you've got to qualify one by testing. But the nice thing about D1.1 is you can write a pre-qualified WPS. Pre-qualified WPS, as long as you follow the rules that are in D1.1, requires no testing. Okay, it's good to go right out of the box. And that'll be one of the things that we'll do if we do the course will be, preparing a pre-qualified WPS for the test only, and filling in some information on the back side of it or on the additional side of it to kind of cover the test, for instance. Let me see if I've got one here. There's still a few people watching. Let's see.
So you're saying with your pre-qualification, you don't have to do a bend or nothing?
No, you just write it. It's got to match the rules of D1.1. So there's specific joints in D1.1 that are called pre-qualified joints. You've got to follow those requirements. There's pass thickness limitations for SMAW, for instance, in a vertical position. I can't do a single pass vertical that's thicker than a 1/2 inch, I think is what it is. I can't do a fill pass that's thicker than, we'll say, 1/4 inch. Those are those are rules for pre-qualification. There's only certain base metal, filler metal combinations that I can use. But if I follow all the rules that are in D1.1, I can write that up pretty quickly. So this one is from a community college I helped in North Carolina. So butt joint type's got to be on there. Single V groove. I've got my details on there. Filler metal. Preheat interpass temperature requirements have got to be on there. Then on the back side of it, I write in stuff that's specific to the test. So I know that information is conveyed to the welder when they do the test in more than one way. Like I'll do a review of the welder test requirements with the welder when I give them the test. And I'll also give them that WPS and say those requirements are in writing on the back. So verbally I'll tell them all welding and grinding has got to be done in position that you're tested in. Welder test supervisor got to review the requirements prior to the start of the test. They've got it in writing. So they've got all of these requirements that are on here that are additional to the code for the most part. These first ones. But then these are the ones that are, okay, so it's 3/8 of an inch. My mind is going as I get older. So maximum root pass, 3/8 of an inch for flat, 5/16 for horizontal. And D1.1, for instance, for GMAW, there's requirements for the vertical and overhead. But this WPS was written just for flat and horizontal. And that was it. But these requirements for how thick a root pass can be, they're in the code book. How wide a single layer can be, all that kind of stuff is stuff I put on the WPS. But all I have to do is write that. Like I use C-Specs Weld Office software. For me to write one of those, it is literally, besides the typing of this part, but for filling out the front of it, it's a 5-minute ordeal. Don't spread that around because I sometimes sell these for like $50. But
What was the program you used again?
It's called Weld Office by C-Spec. And there's other programs out there. There's a company called Computer Engineering. I think is up in the Kansas area. They make software. ESOP has recently bought an online company called WeldNote. They've got an online source for doing it. This one's got code checking in it. So when I write it, if I type in something that's out of range, it'll sometimes give me a warning. Bad part about it is sometimes it gives me warnings about stuff that I know is not in the code that they just thought would be better to make sure everybody knew it. I used to be a customer support technician for C-Specs Weld Office. So when you go there and you look for the price of it, don't think I'm rich. I got to hook up. But I also suggest it for people that are interested in writing WPSs. They've got another product that's for welder qualification records. It does all the code checking. When you fill in the ranges that were used during the test, it fills in the qualified ranges. Okay. But that's kind of the gist. Anybody got any other questions about welder qualification or want to talk about something?
Joel, we've got academic access to AWS. I mean, I can pull up WPSs and stuff like that, or
yeah, that's cool.
Pre-qualified WPS. I don't know what it costs them, but it is neat. I mean, any kind of document things I can pull it up and look. I can only view it. I can't print it or hear it or nothing like that. But is it legal? Say we had a company in our ATF that was going to do some tests, the D1.3 sheet steel thing, and I called the company and found out what type of production work they done, and I pulled up one of the pre-qualified WPSs on our academic access and actually just wrote a WPS off it. Is that legal or?
I mean, it would be hard to make it not legal because if they were working within the ranges of a code, that was, you can't prioritize, you can't make that company, information that can't be shared. If an 1/8 inch 7018 runs from 105 to 135, can't nobody change that. I'm going to write that same thing down if I want to use that full range. So it'd be kind of hard to, to me, that one would be a rough one to get into. But here's the deal with that. And I'm not saying that AWS has got no mistakes on their paperwork. But when you start writing a WPS or a welder performance qualification record without having that book, here's the D1.3, then to me, you're venturing off into a bad area. Okay. So I tell inspectors or people that are doing welder testing, don't test anybody without that actual code. Don't test anybody without that WPS. Okay.
Well, that's, like I said, our academic access, I had access to the D1.3. And first, that was the first thing I done. I pulled it up and completely read it. And then I looked for the code that they was using. And that company, they just welded on like 11 gauge steel was all they welded on.
Yeah.
And then I found a WPS, SWPS that, you know, matched what they was doing. And I just wrote a WPS off of that SWPS.
Oh, no, nah. Yeah, you can't. If it's off of an SWPS, no, you cannot.
Or not SWPS. I can't remember what it was.
Pre-qualified?
Yeah, it's a pre-qualified.
Yeah, pre-qualified WPS, you could do that because those are code rules that you could use that as a guide. That ain't a big deal. But an SWPS, a standard WPS, that is a license-specific document that was qualified by a group of people, different organizations, through the Welding Research Council and otherwise, that they have the procedure qualification record for that. Okay, so an SWPS, no, you can't. You can't write,
I'm sorry, I misquoted. It was a pre-qualified.
Okay. Yeah, pre-qualified. I mean, if you find one of mine out there on the internet somewhere, it's your option to write down what it says. But you just got to realize when you copy that document.
It must have worked. We tested 6 or 8 people.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, actually working. I mean, we can all make thousands and thousands of welds, and you don't have to give me a WPS. Okay. Yeah. It's all good for us to feel good about documentation and paperwork and QA/QC, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more welders that can make welds without a WPS than there are ones that, can make one without one or need one. Anyway.
One of the significant things when you're talking about copying things down is facts are not copyrightable. Water boils at 212. You couldn't copyright that. And an electrode burns between this amps and this amps. Those are not things that can be copyrighted. Those are just facts. But on the portion that Gerald showed us on the bottom where he said, "Oh, grinding has to be in this position," those are not facts. Those are instructional components. Copying those down word for word could get you in trouble.
Yeah. But
copying down the facts off the WPS, facts are facts. Yeah. Like I said, when you duplicate a procedure that's been qualified by testing, like I said, I understand that's a whole different deal. But when you do it with a pre-qualified, there's only so much stuff you can write on a pre-qualified WPS anyway. For instance, it's the BU2A joint design. Well, that's what I've got to write on mine because that's the one that we use for the test. So I don't think that would be an issue. To me, my biggest issue would be putting your faith in a document that was written by somebody else. I would rather you look at my documents and tell me all the stuff that's wrong with them than blindly write them up and say, "Oh yeah, I got this WPS from Gerald Austin. It's right." That's not the way to work in my book. It's more get the code book, learn what it says, learn how to do it, question somebody. I'd rather you learn how to fish than you get fish from me. So if you've got a need to like write a pre-qualified WPS for doing a D1.1 qualification test, then I would rather you go through this and look at it and say, "Gerald, why did you put 70 to 110 right here?" Well, the reason I put 70 to 110 is because AWS D1.1 suggests or requires, depending on your interpretation, that you follow the manufacturer's recommendations. So that's what I put on there. When I give somebody a test, I tell them I do not suggest that you use a 332nd 7018. That's 70 amps. I just tell them outright. I said, that's up to you. I said, that range is on there. I said, you need to find out what works for you. Okay, there it is right there. So this is from D1.1, I think, but of course I would check me. But if I do that 3/8 inch plate,
I could actually flush it out in one pass and still meet the requirements of that WPS in the code, because my maximum root pass thickness is a 1/2 inch for vertical position weld. Now, is that a good idea? Not with them little 332 rods, it ain't. I have 14 starts and stops in there. But I put those options on there so I can, feel comfortable with a pre-qualified WPS. I put the hold points in here. Even though I've already reviewed those with the welder, I want them to have that in writing. And again, I give them the WPS. Now, this one here specifically, I don't. That's for another community college. But when I do a test, I'll ask them, do you want a copy of the welding procedure? It's not like they can go do anything with it. A company can't take that WPS without having some subject matter expertise and go make production joints. Because me as the inspector, I show up and they give me this WPS that dude used when he was doing the test. First thing I'm going to notice is 2 different organizations. Gerald's Real Fine Barbecue Grills and Trailer Hitches did the WPS, but Bubba's Real Fine Structural Steel Buildings is doing the welding. Ain't no allowance for that. Anybody else got anything to add or questions? I'm not again, you got to remember, don't confuse my enthusiasm with skill or ability. What is that right there? Oh, is that your sign?
That's me and my hero, Mr. Jeffers.
Yeah. I said, I'm proud to know somebody famous. Now I know somebody that has had their picture taken with somebody famous.
Yeah, I got an autograph too.
And they live in the same state as I do. Look like we're neighbors. All right. Well, that's kind of the gist of it. Again, for welder qualification testing, there's much more to it. If you get a chance, you can look at that mind map. You can always feel free to email me. If you're interested in doing a class online, it's a Moodle course that I'm setting up. You're going to be required to do, not required, I guess. You ain't got to do nothing. You don't want to. You give me your money. I don't care whether you do it or not. And who knows, there may not even be money involved. But, it's basically going to have some assignments to do. You'll need a code book, okay? If you're interested in learning how to test welders by AWS D1.1, I want to know that you got a code book, because I'm not going to copy and paste their information all over there and fight about fair use laws. You might find a paragraph here and there.
Code book or the 2015?
Do what?
You going to use 2020? I've got a 2015. I don't have a 2020.
I'm going to be using the 2015. Then we'll have to cross-reference. I got someone knocking at my door though. Hang on. And if y'all got to go, I understand that too.
The AWS had a program about 3 months ago on the differences between the current code book and the new code book. It was really interesting. There were some significant areas that were changed, and then there were a number of areas that had minor tweaks in the way the wording was in this presentation. So I think that may be available for viewing on the AWS website. I know it was up for quite a while. It was a free lecture they put on.
Yeah, I seen that on the AWS forum. They had mentioned that and offered links to it. I didn't get an opportunity to get to watch it, but I did say, and I think AWS has got it on their forum. If you can go on the AWS member forum and do a search, you can probably find it, because they have links to it there.
Do you need the book if you test the CWI though for the 2020? They don't allow you to bring a 2015 one in, do they?
No.
Nope, you got to have the
They
book.
still do right now, because they haven't done the transition over into the 2020 book yet. I mean, and it's probably going to be a while before they do it. It's got to go through all their question makers and.
Yeah, it'll probably be a couple years, I'll bet. At least a year.
Have they not already started selling them though?
Yeah.
Yep, I bought one.
Yeah. I've got one on order. I'm waiting for it just because, for our ATF audit, our manual requires us to have the latest code edition available. So I've got a 2015, but I've got to get a 2022 just so when. And of course, I could leave it without one. That way I leave the auditor a bone. If you've ever been through an audit of some type, it's always good to leave them a little something to find. Or just keep on digging. All right. Well, anybody got anything I can help them with?
A lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I can't help it. We can't help but just keep talking about welding. Again, if you're interested in doing a class, and again, we may do it here. I did a survey last week for asking folks what other content they would like to see, what they would like to do on the meetings, and maybe I didn't make it clear enough, but I think I only got 5 or 6 responses out of the 104 or 5 emails that I sent out. As far as, what would you like to see? What's, going forward, what would you like to do? And I'm not running out of ideas necessarily, but I would rather do something that makes it really, really valuable for everybody's time. So we'll just look at this one here real quick. No, I didn't know that. I saw the blade was bent day before yesterday. I cut a couple welders test yesterday, and it had a big chunk out of it. So what part broke? Okay. Just quit running.
Well, Red didn't have it tied on enough, and it rolled and it went, and then it stopped.
Yeah, I'll take a
I mean,
look at
there's
it.
power going to it. It says there's power going to it, but it's not.
Yeah, it may have tripped the motor breaker. So I didn't know that though. So anyway, all right. Done the meeting. But you're all right. You ain't bothering me now. Got to break a few eggs to bake a cake. Days I asked for, time slots and dates and stuff like that. But anyway, only had 6 people respond all together as far as what would be some good ways to go. But I got some good questions in here. So, I'm trying to think about doing continuing these meetings on Wednesday possibly, and not necessarily making them for the welder qualification stuff, but still pursuing things that may be of interest to a welding instructor. I'm just not sure which way to go with them. I mean, I can always find, we've got vendors, equipment vendors, and there's quite a few people that, like to know about online resources, vendors, developing online teaching skills. These green ones are ones that are more interesting to everybody. And then welding inspection training has got 5 out of the 6 that said they're very interested in that. So, if the majority of folks, if I can get a few people to show up every Wednesday and we talk about welding inspection, then we'll do that. If you did not get the link to this meeting from an email or sign up for it on Eventbrite, make sure you put your email address in the, in the chat box, because whatever I'm going to do next, I will be using those email addresses to send it out.
That's the thing about it for me, though. It's this time slot here that I've got students. I've just popped in and out through all this meeting like this, and I mean, I'm out there with my welding hood on.
The welder qualification class. Yeah, the welder qualification training and other inspection training, I would probably do on a weeknight. And and again, it would be set up to where you're going to go through the materials online first and do the assignments, and then we show up and we talk about those online. Work out any questions that, hey, I didn't know what you were talking about here. Or, I couldn't get that video to load or something. As opposed to me doing a lecture or presenting something like this, it would be more of a, flip in the classroom where we talk about what you didn't understand and, go at it that way. So that's going to probably be on a weeknight. Again, unless, if I don't get any more people to fill out this questionnaire, then we may just focus on welding inspection topics. And that's no big deal. Obviously, there's a limitation for us not being face-to-face, but then again, there's not. We all can figure out how to use gauges. We can all see that this is a piece of porosity, or this is a rounded indication, or this is whatever. It's not, it's nice to say, hey, I'd love to have the real replicas in my hand and do this, that, and the other. But, and again, I'm not brilliant, but when I took my first CWI exam, I had never seen a plastic weld replica in my entire life. I've never seen one. I didn't even know they existed. So having those didn't make a difference because I'd inspected regular welds. The only iffy part for me back then was the fact that it looked like somebody had been digging in all the holes with a paper clip. But that was the only concern. It wasn't, oh, I've never looked at this weld before. I've looked at welds. Hopefully we've all inspected welds to a certain extent with students. So it's just a matter of getting our heads around acceptance criteria, what codes do and do not say, getting rid of the wives' tales that are in our head. Okay, those are killers for some folks. You know, if you've been welding for 25 years and every inspector that's come on the job has told you that you cannot weld downhill with ASME Section 9, well, he's been lying to you because that's not in there. Okay, ASME does not prohibit you from welding downhill. You've got to have a qualified WPS, just like you have to have for uphill. But I've heard plenty of folks say, well, yeah, API, you got to do it downhill, and ASME Section 9, you got to do it uphill. Not the case. You got to follow whatever your welding procedure says. But
I just like to,
yeah.
Somebody tells me something and I'm not quite sure about it. I just like to say, well, it's not that I don't trust you. I just don't trust anybody. Can you show me that?
Yeah, yeah. That's why I want to be proven wrong. To me, that's my biggest learning experience right there. If you can say, well, Gerald, ASME Section 9 does prohibit you from welding downhill. We'll have a discussion right here in public and pull some pages up, and I'll let you straighten me out, or vice versa. You know, it can go either way. I mean, I've definitely put my foot in my mouth more than once. But,
you know, Gerald, I don't know. Honestly, I got to tell you, I've been in and out a lot. I've heard a lot of good stuff. So if I repeat something, I apologize. But one of the biggest things I have going with a lot of the weld schools is they will publicize that they'll even specifically AWS certifications. And when I get inquisitive as to, you know, are they an ATF? I said, and usually what I do is I go, you know, I looked and you might want to talk to AWS because they're not listing you as an ATF, which you have to be, you know, so I don't go straight at it, but.
Yeah. Yeah. And I ask welders that, you know, they'll tell me, well, I'm an AWS certified welder. And so I'll pull out my card. I said, you should have a card that looks just like this. I said, that gives me your number. I said, I can go ahead and look it up online in their database. Oh, well, I don't have nothing like that. I've got this card, and you see it from Bob's Real Fine Welder Testing and Trailer Hitches, where he certified it. He is certified.
And Kurt, I think that's where they get around that stuff because they say they get them certified, but they're only getting them qualified. But I mean, that's kind of the qualification is not a certification.
When someone signs that piece of paper on the bottom saying, I, Gerald Austin, hereby certify that Bubba has met the requirements of Gerald's Real Fine Barbecue Grills and Trailer Hitches welding program, he's certified. It's just because I've signed or attested to it, that becomes a certification based on the terminology definitions in AWSA 3.0. Boom, they meet it. The thing when I say AWS certified leads you to believe that you are certified by the American Welding Society, and they're somehow maintaining your documentation, and they're not. You know, they're so on one of those PowerPoint slides, it's the certified in accordance with versus certified by or AWS certified.
Oh, so that is that what you're saying that they're saying?
Yeah.
More of that. I mean, they will talk. And I like you said that, and I was thinking, well, they should say what they mean, not what they want people to think when they say that.
I agree.
Yeah, like I said,
I have my students call them out when they come to visit.
Yeah, it's you know, the whole certification concept, the credentials, to me, it's going crazy. You know, just like with the NC3, not saying it's not a good program, but there's another credentialing organization coming out. Okay. Then you got Sense. And again, we could start up, you know, Gerald's Real Fine Welding Credential Organization. Anybody can start one and be certified in accordance with it. It's just whether it means anything or not. And when I say means it, do the people believe it? You know, one of the biggest projects that I got when I was at one community college for testing and certifying welders was not even as an ATF. Now, but the reason they used us is because we had a written quality program in place for how we did our welder qualification testing. They came in and audited what we were doing, and they knew what we were supposed to be doing while I was testing their potential welders. So I knew that they knew that they could walk in at any time and find a MIC number on a super coupon. You know, we tested 40 some welders in a 2-month period with a TIG all the way out super coupon and a TIG stick super coupon. And it was a good money maker, but it was because we were in ATF, but then again, it wasn't. It was because we had a quality system in place that someone could come in and audit at any given moment so that they knew there was some standardized things happening, you know.
Let me ask this question, Gerald. If, for example, me and you were teaching and we both were CWI, you taught the class and I certified them, is that possible by doing that without being an ATF?
Oh yeah, I mean, without being ATF, it's all possible. I can teach them and certify them. There's no restriction on that. Me as a manufacturer, let's just say I've got Gerald's Real Fine Structural Steel Company. I can bring a helper in, show him how to do a 3G flux core test, which would take about 45 minutes, and tell him what to do while he's welding it. Okay, I can tell him, hold your stick out right here at 3/4 of an inch. Go straight up. I'll tell you to speed up or slow down. And I could still meet the requirements of the code. Now, I'm not saying that's a good idea, but I would not be violating a code rule.
But I thought you're not allowed to teach and also certify them.
Only if you're an ATF.
Ah.
ATFs have got a restriction that you cannot. That's why I've got to have someone else come in and test my students. I can't do it. Even
Gotcha.
when we become the ATF, I can't test my own students. An independent CWI will come in and do those tests.
Gotcha.
So, but that restriction is only based on the AWS QC4 and QC7 documents. And the QC47, the newer release of it, is actually going to release some of that. It's gonna say you can't have been a student within the past 6 months. So that's going to open that up a little bit.
I did not know that. I thought if you taught, you couldn't certify, but that's new. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, like I said, that's just for an ATF, but as far as anything else, it's not a restriction. Now, whether, you know, in my idea for doing that, if I want to do it in the future, let's just say I didn't want to become an ATF, or I wanted to be able to test my students at any given time, what I would probably do is develop me a test booth with cameras in it where it could all be witnessed at one time. No foul play, no nothing like that, and do the test. Have a camera in there. We could bring it down, show it to the weld, record it on the welder qualification test video, and make sure everything's out there in the open, where it's fully video recorded. Nobody can have any doubts about it. Then, and I couldn't do that necessarily for an ATF because it's still restricted. But if I wanted somebody in industry to validate or to believe that the test that I gave one of my students was valid, say, here's the video, you watch it. I suggest you watch it anyway, because I wouldn't want you to hire one of my students if you've never seen them weld before. I said, to me, the paper's nice, but I'd like to go to a video-based welder performance qualification record. We got the technology. It's 2020.
But also by AWS guidelines, you have to keep the specimens for at least a certain amount of years, right?
Not yet. In the AWS 247, there's going to be a 30-day requirement to keep the specimens.
Huh. I thought we had one where we had to keep them for. I have to check with my CWI guys. I thought we had one where we had to keep them for a couple years before we got rid of them.
It probably got written into your quality manual like that.
Gotcha.
Okay, so there's an audit item in the AWS ATF audit form that is about disposal of bend specimens. My answer to the auditor has been this. I mark our bend specimens with what's called a WPQTI number. They're cut out of a plate, okay, or they're cut out of a pipe. They cannot be accidentally substituted for another set of bends. They've got a steel stamp number on them. So what we wrote in my quality manual says they shall be disposed of in an environmentally friendly manner. Because we want to be green. And that was actually suggesting, because I've had the same auditor three times. And, I'd written the manuals up well before that and studied all that stuff. And, when there's not a requirement for how you dispose them in the QC4 standard. Okay, it's not in there. It just says it's got to be addressed. So the first manual that I did, I think I wrote it up saying the fact that they cannot be inadvertently used for another test, because they can't. Okay, if you could accidentally use a set of bends for welder 1's test on welder 2, then you got bigger problems with your system than you know. Okay, that's a big issue right there. If that could happen, then the whole marking of a test coupon from fit up to finals is useless, period. All there is to it. So that's kind of how I worded it in my first manual. He said, it sure is kind of hard for us to come in here and mark this audit item off when you've got all that wording in there. He said, can you not just say you dispose of them in an environmentally friendly manner? I said, yeah, I like that. So for the 2 or 3 audits after that, that's what they did. Which on the very first one, I did the audit. I didn't mean I did it, but I was the representative. For the other 3, I trained the technical manager on how to do them. You know, I trained them on the manual, showed them what was required, that kind of stuff. So they had to actually defend those arguments when the auditor came in. There's advantages to being ATF, but it's not a, it's like anything else. It's any system that's operated by humans. We're prone to mess up. Like I said, I throw my dirty laundry out there. I felt pretty dumb too. It was really rough to call those companies back and say, look, I got to retest these guys because I didn't do what I said we did, even though I certified that I did do what we said we did. I mean, it was a very low point in my CWI career because I'm kind of particular about what I put my name on. And when I realized I had said that I did something that I didn't do, it won't happen again. At least not for that specific issue. But y'all got any more questions? Well, like I said, if y'all want to, if you're interested in getting some more training, holler at me. Well, I'm trying to figure out something that we're going to do next week. It probably won't be, we won't do this. I'm going to put my feelers out. I've had some suggestions. May get a manufacturer's rep to come in here and talk about some stuff. We'll see how it goes. I appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with me. And again, feel free to contact me anytime in between the meetings if you got something I can help you out with. I can throw a Zoom meeting up in just any minute. We can talk about it and make up some stuff, if nothing else. Remember, if I sound confident enough, you'll believe me.
Gerald, you said, I mean, this is kind of a way of working a little bit while you're getting used to teaching, knowing really what it means to have your summers off, right? And of course, this summer is probably really odd anyway, but as far as your welder's cards, can you use your instructional hours, or is that specifically have to be production type welding to maintain your 6-month?
No, all you have to do based on what the standard says is weld with the process. So one of the things that I do, like the high school students that I tested when I was here before, they can come into me and I can sign off on them once they weld with the process. Okay, I can't certify them because we're not ATF yet, but they can use their manufacturer that they work for, or their employer, or if they work for themselves, they can have one of their customers sign that piece of paper. Okay? There's no requirement for the ATF to renew their qualification period. It's not in there. But you can come back. I could even, let's just say you are an AWS certified welder. You come here, I'll contract you to do some work for me. You run a bead, boom, I sign your paper. There's not a requirement for it to be inspected. There's not a requirement for it to be a production job. Okay? And there's not a requirement for it to be documented anywhere other than on that piece of paper for the renewal. Okay? So it's a pretty easy one to keep your AWS certified welder up. It's harder.
Well, I'll just stand up and admit that I'm not an industry experienced weld inspector. I'm been teaching for 16 years and have production welded. Never was certified until I got my CWE. But so, I'm still not in a comfort zone at all with, the inner workings and how to build relationships with companies and that type of stuff. Although I have my advisory committee has, I've had about a half dozen of them call me in the last couple of years saying, you know, hey, can you certify our welders? Well, when it all comes down to it, all they want me to do is watch a WPQ. You know, they don't even want, you know, because I go into the ATF issue and all that. And I said, well, you know, you can call it certification, but you know, this is what it is.
Yeah. Well, I said it is when you put your name on the bottom line of a welder performance qualification record, you've certified that record as being true. That's exactly what it says on the bottom side. If you look in AWS D1.1, you will not find the term certified welder. It's not in there. The only time certified is even used in D1.1 is in reference to AWS or to ASNT certifications for non-destructive examination. And doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but the term certified does just mean somebody signed for it or attested to something happening. So it is accurate to say, yes, a welder certification record. Okay, industries call it a welder performance qualification record. But once it becomes a signed record by somebody, someone has certified something. Just like when one of your students graduates from class, and you give them a certificate and you sign on there that I attest that Bubba has welded all the good stuff up. Bubba is now a certified completer of your class. Whether that means anything or not, that's based on your relationships and that kind of stuff. But I mean, I wouldn't be afraid to use the term, I certified Bubba, even though I didn't do it as an ATF. I would be afraid to use the term that Bubba is an AWS certified welder because I tested him. That's not the case. Now, if I tested him through an ATF, that's the truth. That is accurate. But if I tested him just in accordance with D1.1, that is not the truth. And, you know, it can be argued one way or the other. I'm not comfortable using the term AWS certified welder for somebody that didn't go through an ATF. I am comfortable using a welder certified in accordance with AWS D1.1 or AWS D1.3. That is an accurate statement.
That's correct. You can say they're certified to the AWS standard.
Yeah.
Not certified by the AWS standard.
Right. And there's a slide on that PowerPoint that I zipped through, you know, because I know I can get a little long-winded on this stuff, but there's actually a slide on there that's certified in accordance with versus certified by. That kind of talks about that specific thing. So there's
and realistically, whatever type of certification you have, when you go out and get a job at a new company, they're going to have you scratch an arm on a bead.
Yeah.
You know, airplane pilots and welders are the only two professions that are tested every time we change jobs. Surgeons not. Nobody else is.
I don't know if you were here before, Mr. Jefferson, when I talked about it. But, you know, that's one of the things that I hope students will realize is if you go to a company and they don't want to give you a welding test, be scared. Okay? Be scared. Be very scared. Okay? If you'll trust a piece of paper for me to apply my skill, especially if you don't come out and check me out the first day or two, okay, then I know we're probably not going to get along good because I probably care more about welding than your whole company does.
That was the guy that welded the stair tread in the picture you had.
Yeah.
The guy without being tested. Yeah. That was an amazing piece of undercut on that weld. Yeah. You had to have had that rod turned up, you know.
And the bad part about it, that was actually the bottom floor stair landing. Okay. It's not like he was out in the man lift, hanging out of it sideways. That was the ground floor. I could reach up and touch it with my hand. I could have stood on a cinder block and had it right here and made that weld with it.
I thought that was a back gouged weld. I didn't know it was.
I've got it on that weldingclassroom.com website. I've got a couple of articles I wrote about special inspection. You know, about my experience, because I hadn't done, my inspection had been maybe primarily boilers, pressure vessels, heavy fabricated steel for industry, but not necessarily structural steel. Some, but most of the structural steel that I did went into a plant. So they were specific and they sent inspectors out there for it. It wasn't for a building. When I started doing the inspection on buildings up here in Northeast Tennessee, it was sad even. Like I said, it was, and again, that weldingclassroom.com, I've got a couple articles written about it, because it's not, every student that's out there in that shop right now, I guarantee you, wouldn't leave weld like I saw on my very first special inspection at a PetSmart is what it was. And like I said, they didn't have the slag chipped off. They looked at me like I was crazy when I said, hey, I want to get up there with a ladder. They said, well, you can see that the welds have got smoke on the backside of them. So that got me kind of worried. But then when he said, well, that's how we've always done it. I've been doing these for 25 years. He said, they don't ever get up there and inspect the bar joists. He said, well, you're going to have to call one of them. So that $1 store, I was still doing inspections the day the paint on the sheetrock was drying. They were having to lay down plastic for me to get up in a lift, because they made the assumption that eventually it would go away. Then at the end of the job, the engineer called me and said, hey, what about these open items on your inspection report? As far as I know, they're still open. I'll go look at them. So I went and looked at them 3 days before they were supposed to turn it over to the owner, and those items were still there. So they had to jump through a few hoops and get their stuff fixed. And then I finally went out there and looked at it again. They got it taken care of. But you can imagine I'm smiling when I showed up.
And you were the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a company in Gatlinburg tell me that they owned the city of Gatlinburg, and they weren't worried about some inspector not buying stuff off. So I actually sent that little bit of information to the Gatlinburg building inspector, and I never got a reply back. Maybe they're right. Maybe they do own Gatlinburg. But.
Hey, don't tell me about that. I'm going there this weekend.
Well, it was on the Anakista lift. I'm still recording this. I don't care. But it wasn't on the lift part of it. It was on the building at the bottom. They had sheetrock up already around it all.
I'm gonna go take a picture. I'm gonna show you guys next week.
Yeah. You can't see the welds. That's what they did to me.
Oh, they're covered up.
They had sheetrock, ceiling tiles in, everything. So we need somebody to sign off on this. I said, man, you got the wrong dude.
And my wife's talking about wanting to go the Anakista lift.
It's pretty neat looking. The lift is cool. I went out there when I was there looking at the building. I went out there and looked at what they had done on the support structure. It was all, first rate stuff. But the building, and their buildings are not falling down in Tennessee or anywhere else in the world for the most part. But that doesn't matter to me. That's not my decision as an inspector as to whether they're going to last or not. It's my decision as an inspector to verify that the written requirements were met. If they say the weld has got to be polished up to a 250 micro-inch finish, well, they better be polished up to 250 micro-inches. I don't care if it's on your doghouse. If I got a sign for it, it's got to be that way. Even if I know it's silly. Even if I've inspected 1,000 dog houses, the weld was 60-10. If you said this one's got to be polished up to 250 micro-inches, or you get my signature, it's going to be that way.
Yeah, my wife gives me a hard time too, because everywhere we go, I have to inspect every weld around.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Looking at welds again?
My kids have said that we don't have photo album strips. What we have is stories and welding books I've written. Because I had pictures of welds all over the country, and I'll stop and up at on Klingman's Dome, going up, there's an aluminum railing at the ranger station at the bottom. I have pictures of that, and it's in one of my books, and it is atrocious. It is gobbed on there like you would not believe. And so I'm taking these real close-up pictures, and everybody's taking pictures of the scenery. I got my camera focused on the railing. One of the rangers walked by and looked at me, and I said, I'm a welding teacher. And he goes, oh, just keeps on walking.
So there's an article on LinkedIn, but I think I've got a link to some of the pictures I thought. But again, when I first did my first one, it was right after I quit a job at a community college. I was working for a community college up here and had some disagreements, so I just told them they could have it. I was looking for work. Dude called me and said, "Hey, I need someone to go inspect some welds at a PetSmart." So here's an example of a weld access hole. That's at a major college in the state of Tennessee. That's a moment connection that's done at the top of I think that's about a 50-foot column, and it's a 24-inch thick beam going across. There's the end of it. There's one where they put the backing strip in, but they turned it up on edge. And plus they've got it painted nice and, good with some red oxide primer. That's at a stadium at a college. Matter of fact, that's the same place where the 6-inch steel scale went through the back of the backing strip. That's how the flange connections were fit up right there. That's at another major university in the state of Tennessee. That's just their bracing, but I put my hand up on it up in the lift, and the boom would come off in my hand. How about that right there for a connection? Those holes is wallered out a little bit. That's some more bridging, so that's not a big deal, but it still says it had to be 1-inch long welds meeting the requirements of D1.1. So that's a tubular connection, so the undercut requirement's a lot tighter. That's about 3/16 of an inch deep.
Yeah, you can see where they clean the steel off too.
Yeah.
Not.
There's another. This one's kind of neat. And this is one where somebody wrote a letter about me saying that I was trying to hold the requirements for Oak Ridge. But anyway, you see the joint's not filled. So I get out there with the engineer and I show them to him. And then the welder comes up to me. He said, well, the reason that I only filled those up part way is because they told me to put 1/4-inch fillet welds in them. So I only filled it 1/4 of an inch. That's literally what he said. So all of their moment connections were partially filled groove welds. No, that's mine. That's at another, it's not a university, but a college. But that's the knife plate where a square tube goes over, goes over the knife plate on diagonal brace. And that is about the 4th iteration of repairs. And that's the best looking weld they got, but they still undercut the edge of it too much. There's another one. That's a diagonal brace on a wall in the stadium. It's the underside. It's a hard weld to get to, don't get me wrong. But it's not an impossible weld to get to. The diagonal brace, it comes up like this, sitting on the knife plate. It was 6 inches off the floor. So they left it thinking that I was going to eventually forget about it. Well, I didn't. They called me, said, hey, we need you to buy off on these welds, come out here and look at them. They hadn't done anything to it. It was still ugly. It wasn't this weld. But the bad part about it, they had then poured the concrete floor. So now there was only about that much room for them to get up underneath there and do anything with it. So they should have fixed it first, for sure.
Just had a boy pick up his stuff, and he was dead set he was going to go to weld school. And I said, so what's your plan after weld school? And he goes, well, I thought I'd get an ironworkers local. And I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense. Why are you going to spend $18,000 to go to a pipe fitting school when you're going to go into a union and get trained anyway? So he told me today, well, hey, they're taking my application. I'm supposed to go down for a weld test. So
the sheet metals and iron workers up here in Knoxville, they're doing a big expansion at ORNL at Oak Ridge, and they're booming right now. They're doing their sheet metal workers test is stainless steel pulse MIG uphill and overhead, and they're taking in apprentices in the fall. And then the Iron Workers Union, I think they were doing an inner shield flux core test with 71 PA. But I'm actually going to try to go up there to the Sheet Metal Workers Union and take the test just so I can get some work for the summer. You know, because I didn't plan on not working the summer. I took my pay in a 10-month period. That's why I'm trying to hustle y'all out some inspection training. Because mama don't need new shoes, but she's got to pay for laces on the ones she's got.
Yeah.
When I signed up for this gig, I said I'll take my pay in 10 months. I'm gonna do something this summer. And that was a big mistake. But yeah, this is a.
But one thing about if he's wanting to go to the ironworker thing, but if he goes to school and get education, he'll learn more than just how to stick weld or flux core or something like that. He may not want to be an iron worker the rest of his life. And you know, I'm heavy on pipe welding. That's my profession, where I come from, pipe and boiler tubes. So
yeah,
I do that. And if I can get them to the point that they can pass my 6G pipe test and doing that 3G and 4G 1-inch with backing strip ain't gonna be no problem for them.
No.
But like I said, if that's all he ever intends to do is be an iron worker, you're right. He may not, but he may somewhere down the future. And anything you learn other than just sitting there welding fillet welds all day, I think he'd be better off.